She walked into the luxury car showroom wearing a threadbare sweater and faded jeans. When she asked about the $475,000 Aston Martin, the sales manager actually laughed in her face. "People like you don't belong here," he sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Try the bus stop outside." Her hands trembled as hot tears threatened to fall. She left without a word. What they didn't know, she was worth $1.2 billion. The next morning, a convoy of 3 Rolls-Royces pulled up to the dealership. When her husband stepped out, the manager's knees nearly buckled. Revenge would be served ice cold. Sunlight bounced off the gleaming facades of Manhattan Motors. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased vehicles most people only fantasized about. Bentley, Ferrari, Lamborghini, each price tag more outrageous than the last. Sarah Lynn pushed through the heavy glass doors, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her worn blue sweater, faded jeans, and complete lack of makeup reflected a woman who had better things to do than fuss over appearances. At 38, she carried herself with the quiet assurance that comes from knowing exactly who you are. What wasn't apparent from her modest appearance was that Sarah had founded and built Reach Out Foundation, providing prosthetics and medical care to children in developing countries. Long before meeting her husband, she'd transformed her medical engineering degree into an organization that had helped thousands of young amputees walk again. As she entered the showroom, her eyes immediately settled on a sleek silver Aston Martin DB11, perfect for her father's 70th birthday. After surviving a brutal battle with pancreatic cancer, he deserved his dream car. She could easily afford it. Her patents and investments had made her wealthy in her own right, though few people knew that. Across the gleaming floor, Maxwell Pierce straightened his Italian silk tie. As senior sales director, he prided himself on sniffing out serious buyers from time wasters. One glance at Sarah in her shabby clothes, and he smirked knowingly at his colleagues. "Good morning," Sarah smiled at a young salesman who approached her. "Welcome to Manhattan Motors. I'm Ryan. How can I help you today?" Before Sarah could respond, Maxwell swooped in. "I'll take it from here, Ryan." He turned to Sarah with a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "The subway entrance is 2 blocks east, ma'am." "Actually," Sarah replied pleasantly, "I'm interested in that silver Aston Martin." Maxwell's smile froze. He'd seen this routine 1,000 times. Ordinary people wandering in to gawk at cars they could never hope to afford. With quarter-end quotas looming and 3 appointments with real clients scheduled that afternoon, he had zero patience for fantasies. "That's the DB11 AMR Limited Edition. Only 7 were allocated to North America this year," he said, emphasizing each word as if speaking to a small child. "Perhaps I could direct you to our economy car division. They're in a separate building about 6 blocks south." Sarah noticed how his eyes dissected her simple clothing, lingering on her scuffed sneakers. She was accustomed to such judgments. Most people couldn't comprehend that she deliberately chose this lifestyle, finding purpose in simplicity despite having access to enormous wealth. "I'd really like to learn more about this one," she persisted politely. "Could I see the interior?" Maxwell's expression hardened. Behind him, 3 salespeople exchanged knowing glances. "The DB11 AMR is shown by appointment only," he lied smoothly. "Our qualified clients typically schedule private viewings." Just then, a couple dripping in designer labels entered. Maxwell's demeanor transformed instantly. "Please excuse me," he said to Sarah without actually looking at her. "Ryan can give you a brochure." He strode toward the couple, arms extended in welcome. "Mr. and Mrs. Jackson, what a pleasure to see you again." Ryan approached Sarah with an apologetic smile. He couldn't be more than 24, and his suit seemed borrowed from someone larger. "I'm sorry about that," he said quietly. "Would you like me to tell you about the DB11? "I would, thank you," Sarah replied. As Ryan enthusiastically described the vehicle's features, Sarah noticed Maxwell leading the well-dressed couple directly to the Aston Martin. He opened the door with dramatic flourish, inviting Mrs. Jackson to sit inside. The same car he'd claimed was appointment only. "This particular model has a waiting list of 9 months, Maxwell was saying loudly enough to carry, "but I've set aside one for our most discerning clients." Mrs. Jackson ran her hand along the leather interior. It's exquisite, but I'm not sure about the color. We can certainly explore custom options, Maxwell assured her. Sarah approached quietly. Excuse me, I was hoping to purchase this model today. Maxwell's face flushed red. As I mentioned earlier, this vehicle is being shown to these customers. Perhaps you could come back another time. The Jacksons looked uncomfortably between Maxwell and Sarah. I'm specifically interested in this car, Sarah stated calmly, for my father's birthday next month. Maxwell stepped away from the Jacksons, lowering his voice, but not enough. Look, I understand people like to dream, but this is a place of business. That vehicle costs more than most houses in the suburbs. I've been patient, but you're interrupting a legitimate sale. Several nearby customers had stopped to watch the uncomfortable exchange. Ryan hovered anxiously nearby. I'm prepared to make a cash purchase today, Sarah said, maintaining her composure. That was when Maxwell's professional facade completely shattered. He laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that cut through the showroom. A cash purchase, really? His voice was deliberately loud now, designed to humiliate. This isn't a flea market, lady. We're talking about $500,000. People who can afford these cars don't dress like... He gestured dismissively at her entire outfit. Sarah felt heat rise in her face, not from embarrassment, but from slow-building anger. Not for herself, she'd experienced such treatment before, but for anyone who had ever been judged by their appearance alone. I believe my money is as good as anyone else's, she said quietly. Maxwell stepped closer, using his height to intimidate. Let me make something crystal clear, he said, venom dripping from every word. You are wasting my time and embarrassing yourself. Either make an appointment for a serious discussion, dressed appropriately, or please leave the premises immediately. The showroom had gone silent. The Jacksons had backed away from the car, visibly uncomfortable. Is there a problem here? A new voice joined the conversation as the dealership's owner, Richard Torres, approached, drawn by the commotion. Maxwell straightened his tie. No problem at all, sir. Just explaining to this woman that we operate by appointment for qualified buyers. Richard assessed the situation quickly, taking in Sarah's simple appearance and the watching crowd. His expression made it clear which side he was taking. I see, he said coldly. Miss, Lynn, Sarah supplied. Ms. Lynn, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. Our clientele typically, well, they understand the exclusivity of our vehicles. I understand perfectly, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the burning humiliation in her chest. Your sales director has made your policies abundantly clear. Maxwell stepped forward again, his voice dripping with condescension. If you're genuinely interested, which I seriously doubt, you can call for an appointment. But I'd strongly suggest bringing proof of funds and dressing the part. These cars, he gestured grandly around the showroom, are for a certain caliber of people. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Someone actually snickered. Sarah looked around at the judging faces, at Maxwell's smug expression, at the owner's tacit approval of his employees' behavior. She'd faced discrimination before, but rarely so blatantly, so publicly. I see, she said simply. With dignity intact but spirit wounded, she turned and walked toward the exit. Behind her, she heard Maxwell's voice, not nearly quiet enough. Some people just don't know their place in the world. As she pushed through the glass doors into the bright morning, Sarah pulled out her phone. The humiliation stung, but a small, resolute smile formed on her lips as she dialed a number. The Park Estate stretched across 30 acres outside Manhattan, its understated elegance revealing nothing of the billions behind its ownership. Eric Park preferred it that way. At 42, the tech visionary had revolutionized artificial intelligence and quantum computing, building a fortune while maintaining a deliberately low profile. When Sarah entered his home office, Eric looked up from his desk, immediately setting aside his work. 15 years of marriage had taught him to read her expressions with precision. Something was wrong. What happened? He asked, moving around the desk to meet her. Sarah sank into a leather chair, the morning's events washing over her. It was educational, she said with a wry smile that didn't reach her eyes. She recounted the experience at the dealership, the condescension, the humiliation, the blatant discrimination. As she spoke, Eric's expression darkened, but he remained silent, giving her space to process. It's not about me, she concluded. I have the privilege of walking away knowing the truth. But how many people get treated that way every day without the comfort of knowing they actually could afford what they're being denied? Eric nodded thoughtfully. In their years together, this was what had always moved him most about Sarah, her consistent concern for others, even when she herself had been wronged. So what would you like to do about it? He asked finally. Part of me wants to do nothing, she admitted. Just buy Dad's gift elsewhere. But then I think about that young salesman, Ryan, who treated me with respect regardless of how I was dressed. And I think about all the people who face that kind of judgment without having any recourse. She looked directly at Eric. These people need to understand that worth isn't determined by appearance. But I don't want revenge. I want awareness. Eric nodded slowly, a plan forming. I think I might have an idea that accomplishes both. Nothing too dramatic, Sarah warned, knowing her husband's protective instincts. No buying the dealership and firing everyone. Eric laughed. Nothing so cliché. But maybe, he leaned forward, eyes twinkling, a little education is in order. Together, they crafted a plan. Not for revenge, but for enlightenment. Something that might change perspectives more effectively than simple retribution. Are you sure you don't want to come along? Eric asked when they'd finalized the details. Sarah shook her head. This isn't about me needing to witness their comeuppance. It's about them learning to see beyond appearances. She paused, then added with a smile, but I expect a full report. As evening settled over their home, Eric made several phone calls, setting things in motion for the following morning. Tomorrow would bring a powerful lesson in humility and the danger of assumptions, not just for Maxwell Pierce, but for everyone at Manhattan Motors. The following morning arrived with perfect weather. Maxwell Pierce entered Manhattan Motors with confident strides, straightening his signature silk tie. Yesterday's incident with the underdressed woman had become an amusing anecdote he'd shared over drinks with colleagues. Another delusional dreamer thinking she belonged in the world of luxury automobiles. The showroom gleamed under precisely positioned lighting, exotic cars arranged strategically to maximize their allure. Maxwell had just finished the morning staff meeting, emphasizing the importance of qualifying customers properly. Remember, he'd instructed the sales team, our time is valuable. We cater to a specific clientele. It's not elitism, it's efficiency. Ryan, the young salesman, had remained quiet during the meeting, his discomfort evident. Maxwell made a mental note to have a word with him about proper customer assessment. At precisely 10:08 a.m., the distinctive purr of exceptional engines drew attention outside. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a sight unlike any other unfolded. A convoy of 3 vehicles glided to a stop directly in front of the main entrance. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Even Maxwell, typically unimpressed by luxury vehicles given his daily proximity to them, felt his pulse quicken. First in line, a Rolls-Royce Phantom extended wheelbase. But not just any Phantom, but was a custom bespoke model with a unique obsidian black finish that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Behind it, a Bentley Bacalar, one of only 12 ever made. And completing the trio, a Ferrari SF90 Stradale in a color Maxwell had never seen before. Is that? Richard Torres, the owner, had emerged from his office, drawn by the sudden silence. The bespoke Phantom, Maxwell confirmed, already moving toward the entrance. Extremely rare configuration. And that Bacalar, my God. A uniformed chauffeur exited the Rolls-Royce and walked around to open the rear passenger door with white-glove precision. From the vehicle emerged a man of commanding presence, tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that whispered rather than shouted its 5-figure price tag. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly groomed, his posture effortlessly authoritative. Maxwell's salesman instincts kicked into overdrive. This was beyond a good prospect. This was the kind of client dealerships competed for, the kind whose purchases included not just one vehicle, but potentially an ongoing relationship worth millions. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Manhattan Motors," Maxwell called out, intercepting the distinguished visitor before any other salesperson could approach. "Maxwell Pierce, Senior Sales Director. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today." The man regarded Maxwell with an unreadable expression, then offered a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Eric Park," he replied simply, offering a firm handshake. Maxwell's mind raced. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't immediately place it. Regardless, the fleet of vehicles spoke volumes about the man's financial status. "Mr. Park, it's truly an honor," Maxwell gushed. "What brings you to our humble establishment today? Perhaps I could show you our newest arrivals. We just received a limited edition." Eric raised a hand slightly, halting Maxwell's practiced pitch. "Actually, I'm here about a specific vehicle, the Aston Martin DB11 AMR, silver." Maxwell's smile broadened. "Excellent choice, sir. One of only 7 produced for North America this year. I'd be delighted to show you. It's actually right over—" "I know where it is," Eric interrupted smoothly. "My wife was here yesterday expressing interest in it." Maxwell's customer service smile remained fixed, though confusion flickered in his eyes. "Your wife? I don't recall. Perhaps one of my colleagues assisted her?" Eric's expression cooled noticeably. "No, Mr. Pierce, you assisted her, or rather, you refused to assist her. Sarah Lynn. She was wearing a blue sweater and jeans. You suggested she might be more comfortable looking at economy cars 6 blocks south." The blood drained from Maxwell's face as realization dawned. Behind him, he heard a small gasp from Ryan, who had been hovering nearby. "Mr. Park, Maxwell stammered, his usual smooth delivery abandoning him. "There must be some misunderstanding. We welcome all customers here." By now, Richard Torres had approached, sensing a situation developing. "Is everything all right, Maxwell?" Eric turned his attention to the owner. "Mr. Torres, I presume?" "Richard Torres, yes indeed. Welcome to Manhattan Motors." "Thank you. I was just explaining to Mr. Pierce that my wife visited yesterday, interested in purchasing the DB11 AMR as a gift for her father. She was, however, treated in a manner that I find deeply troubling." Richard's expression shifted rapidly from welcoming to concerned. I'm sorry to hear that. I believe I was briefly involved in a conversation, but I wasn't aware of all the details." Eric nodded thoughtfully. "The details include your senior sales director here suggesting that people like her don't belong in an establishment like this, based solely on her casual attire." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Other salespeople, support staff, and even a few early customers. The showroom had gone completely silent. "Mr. Park," Maxwell began, desperation creeping into his voice, "if there was any misunderstanding—" "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Ryan suddenly spoke up. All eyes turned to the young salesman, who looked surprised at his own courage. "Ms. Lynn was treated poorly. She was polite and specific about her interest in the DB11, and she was dismissed repeatedly based on her appearance." Maxwell shot Ryan a withering look, but the damage was done. Eric turned back to Richard Torres. "It's interesting. My wife founded and runs Reach Out Foundation. It's been her life's work since before I met her. They've provided over 50,000 prosthetic limbs to children in developing countries." He paused, letting this sink in. "Sarah chooses to dress simply because she believes in living modestly despite our means. She finds it keeps her connected to the families she helps. It's one of the countless reasons I love her." Richard Torres had gone pale. "Mr. Park, I assure you this does not reflect the values of our dealership. We pride ourselves on—" "Actions speak louder than mission statements, Mr. Torres," Eric interrupted firmly. "Now, regarding the DB11, Eric paused, his eyes scanning the silent showroom. "I'm not here to purchase just one vehicle." Maxwell perked up slightly at this, a glimmer of professional hope breaking through his distress. "I was planning to purchase the DB11 for my wife's father, as Sarah intended, but I was also considering a fleet replacement for our corporate vehicles. 12 in total, and my personal collection could use updating as well. Torres' eyes widened. A sale of that magnitude would make their quarterly targets in a single transaction. However, Eric continued, I find myself questioning whether this is the right establishment for such a significant investment. The silence in the showroom was absolute. Maxwell looked physically ill. Mr. Park, Richard began desperately, I cannot apologize enough for this unfortunate incident. I assure you this is not how we conduct business. Please allow us to make this right. Eric considered this for a moment. Perhaps there is a way forward, he said finally. But it would require more than just selling me cars. Anything, Richard assured him quickly. Reach Out Foundation is hosting a benefit gala next month. We're raising funds for a new pediatric prosthetics center in Southeast Asia. Eric turned to the mortified sales director. Maxwell, I think your presence would be educational. Maxwell swallowed hard. Sir, not as a guest, Eric clarified, as a volunteer. The foundation is always looking for people to help with setup, to assist the children, to see firsthand the work being done. The implications were clear. This wasn't just about selling cars anymore. It was about learning a fundamental lesson in human value. Additionally, Eric continued, addressing Richard Torres, the dealership might consider implementing a training program on unconscious bias. I know several excellent consultants. Richard nodded emphatically. Absolutely, we would welcome such an initiative. As for the vehicles, Eric turned to Ryan, the young salesman who had spoken up. I'd like you to handle all the paperwork, starting with the DB11 for my father-in-law. Ryan's eyes widened. Me? Thank you, sir. I'd be honored. Good, Eric said with finality. Now, shall we discuss the specifics of the corporate fleet? As they moved toward Torres's office, Eric paused in front of the DB11, running his hand along its sleek contour. My wife has excellent taste, doesn't she? Behind them, Maxwell Pierce stood motionless, his perfect world fundamentally altered. The harsh truth had finally dawned on him. He had revealed his character not by how he treated those he thought important, but by how he treated those he believed were not. 1 month later, the Reach Out Foundation Benefit Gala transformed the Grand Hyatt into a celebration of possibility. Children with prosthetic limbs and their families mingled with donors, medical professionals, and supporters. Near the entrance, Maxwell Pierce, dressed not in his usual designer attire but in the event staff uniform, directed guests and assisted a young girl with a prosthetic leg. The past month had changed him profoundly. His volunteer work at the foundation had started as an obligation, the price of professional survival. But something unexpected had happened as he witnessed the challenges these children faced daily and the dignity with which they met them. Across the room, Sarah Lynn, elegant in a simple blue dress, approached him. Despite knowing who she was now, Maxwell was struck again by her lack of pretension. How are you finding the experience, Maxwell? She asked. He considered the question seriously. Humbling, he finally answered, and necessary. Sarah nodded. Mia seems to have taken a liking to you, she observed, referring to the girl with the prosthetic leg. She's teaching me about adaptive dance, Maxwell admitted. Apparently I have terrible rhythm. This drew a genuine laugh from Sarah. Maxwell's expression grew serious. Mrs. Park, I know I've apologized formally, but I need to say it directly. I'm truly sorry for how I treated you. There's no excuse. You're right, there isn't, she agreed, but without malice. The question is what you've learned. That worth isn't determined by appearance, position, or possessions, he said thoughtfully, and that everyone deserves respect until they prove otherwise. Not the other way around. Good lessons, Sarah acknowledged. Expensive ones too, I imagine. Maxwell nodded ruefully, thinking of the substantial business the dealership had lost when Eric Park decided to purchase only the DB11 and not the additional fleet. Worth every penny, he replied sincerely. Across the room, Eric joined them, placing a gentle hand on his wife's shoulder. Maxwell was just sharing some of his insights, Sarah explained. Eric nodded. I hear you've become quite involved with the adaptive sports program. Yes, sir. In fact, I've signed up to continue volunteering after my required period. He hesitated, then added, And I've been working with Mr. Torres on revamping our customer approach at the dealership. No more qualifying by appearance. I'm glad to hear it, Eric said, then surprised Maxwell by adding, which reminds me, that corporate fleet I mentioned. We're still in the market. Perhaps you could handle that transaction? Ryan speaks highly of how you've been mentoring him. Maxwell's expression registered shock before settling into genuine gratitude. I would be honored, Mr. Park. Truly honored. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Maxwell watched Sarah and Eric Park working the room, not flaunting their wealth or influence, but connecting genuinely with each child and family. He reflected on how completely his perception had been transformed. A month ago, he would have dismissed someone like Sarah Lynn based on her casual appearance. Now he understood that true value ran deeper than designer labels, luxury cars, or executive titles. As Maxwell helped Mia back into her wheelchair after a photo session, the girl grinned up at him. You know what, Mr. Maxwell? You're pretty cool for a grown-up. Maxwell smiled. Coming from you, Mia, that's the highest compliment I've received in a very long time. And he meant it. We all make judgments based on appearances, don't we? But, as Maxwell Pierce discovered, looking beyond the surface can reveal extraordinary people and life-changing opportunities. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button right now. We share powerful life lessons every week that could change your perspective forever. Have you ever judged someone too quickly based on how they looked? Or been judged unfairly yourself? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone who needs to hear it today. Remember, true wealth has nothing to do with your bank account. It's about how you treat others when you think no one important is watching.